Coming back for some brand new breaking news. MS Now has just learned that FBI Director Kash Patel may be out of a job in the coming months. 3 people with knowledge of the situation say President Trump and his top aides have grown tired of Patel and the unflattering headlines he's been generating recently, including using a government jet to visit his girlfriend and enlisting a SWAT team as her security detail. Joining us, MS Now Justice and Intelligence reporter Ken Delanian and MS Now White House reporter Laura Barone-Lopez. Both of them broke this story along with Carol Leonnig. Ken, give me more.
Well, Katie, I should say, first of all the qualifiers apply here. With Donald Trump and personnel decisions, you never actually know exactly what's going on. But we are being told that Kash Patel, the FBI director, is on increasingly thin ice. And the president is considering replacing him by the end of the year with Andrew Bailey, the former Attorney General of Missouri, who is acting now as co-deputy FBI director, along with Dan Bongino. And it's for all the reasons that you just said and others.
Okay, so the clock is ticking and President Trump is running out of time to escape what could be the most damaging revelation of his entire political career. The Epstein Files Transparency Act that Trump himself signed on November 19, 2025, requires Attorney General Pam Bondi to publicly release all Epstein-related documents by December 19th. That's just over 2 weeks away, and the pressure is mounting from every direction as bipartisan lawmakers demand answers and the administration scrambles to figure out how to handle a situation that threatens to blow up in Trump's face in ways that could be politically fatal and potentially even legally catastrophic. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
The use of taxpayer resources, the flying his girlfriend around on the FBI jet, but also the premature tweets, including related to the Charlie Kirk assassination and other investigations, that terrorist attack in Michigan where Patel got out in front of the investigation and tweeted about the arrests before the rest of the government was ready for that to happen. So Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche of the Justice Department have been annoyed with Patel for a long time, although they've publicly denied it when others have reported it. And now it's increasingly clear that the White House is as well. Now, our reporting this may actually enhance his job security, right? So it's hard to know exactly what's going to happen, but that is the reporting at this hour, Katie.
Yeah, no, we have seen situations where when it comes out that somebody is being considered for removal in order to prove that that Donald Trump does not have any chaos on his team or in his cabinet, has come out and said, no, of course not. I'm not considering anything. Let me play the president a little bit earlier today.
Let me be very clear about what's happening here, because the stakes are enormous and everyone needs to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Trump signed a law requiring the release of documents related to Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex offender who ran a trafficking operation involving powerful men and underage girls for decades before his suspicious death in federal custody. Trump has a long and extensively well-documented history with Epstein that he's tried to minimize and distance himself from for years. They were friends. They socialized together at parties and events for well over a decade. They were photographed together repeatedly in settings that show obvious familiarity and comfort with each other. There are quotes from Trump himself talking about how Epstein likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. And now the files that could detail exactly what Trump knew about Epstein's activities and potentially what he participated in or witnessed are supposed to become public in a matter of days. Come on, think about this for a second and really let it sink in. Trump signed this law presumably believing he could control what actually got released through his loyalists in the Justice Department. He has his own hand-picked Attorney General in Pam Bondi, who has a long history of protecting him. He has allies throughout the federal bureaucracy who owe their positions to him. He probably thought he could manage the disclosure process in a way that protected him from the worst revelations while appearing to embrace transparency and get credit for openness. But now bipartisan groups of lawmakers are demanding briefings and pushing hard for full compliance with no political redactions. The House Oversight Committee is releasing additional Epstein materials, including those deeply disturbing photos and videos from the private island, and the legal and political walls are closing in from multiple directions simultaneously in ways that leave fewer and fewer escape routes. Senators Jeff Merkley, Lisa Murkowski, Ben Ray Lujan, and Representatives Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna, a genuinely bipartisan group spanning the entire political spectrum, from progressive Democrats to libertarian-leaning Republicans, have formally demanded a Justice Department briefing by December 5th to discuss the contents of the new information and specifically the connections with Trump and other notable figures. They want to know what's in these files before they become public. They want to understand what the administration is planning to release and what they might try to withhold under various pretexts. And they're putting the pressure on in ways that make it extremely difficult for the administration to simply stonewall or delay without facing serious political blowback and potentially legal consequences for defying a law the president himself signed. The law Trump signed is actually quite strong in its transparency requirements, and that's what makes this situation so dangerous for him. It mandates a 30-day release window with some privacy protections for victims whose identities deserve protection from further exposure. But it explicitly and specifically prohibits redactions made for political purposes or to protect the reputations of powerful individuals who were connected to Epstein but weren't themselves victims of his crimes. That prohibition is absolutely crucial to understanding the dynamics at play here. The administration can't simply black out anything embarrassing or incriminating to Trump and claim they're protecting someone's privacy. The law specifically anticipated and tried to prevent exactly that kind of manipulation by powerful interests trying to protect themselves. But here's where it gets really interesting and really concerning for anyone who cares about transparency and accountability. There are serious and well-founded doubts about whether the administration actually intends to comply fully with the law's requirements. There have been prior delays in producing Epstein-related materials when Congress requested them. There have been efforts to block or limit disclosures through various legal mechanisms and procedural objections. The pattern strongly suggests an administration that's actively looking for any excuse to avoid releasing damaging information, rather than one genuinely committed to transparency and letting the chips fall where they may. And that established pattern is exactly what the bipartisan group of lawmakers is trying to challenge by demanding briefings and public accountability before the deadline arrives. NBC News is reporting extensively on the ongoing resistance and the serious questions about whether Bondi will actually follow through on the legal requirements or find ways to obstruct. The Washington Post is covering the political dynamics and the escalating pressure campaign from lawmakers who aren't backing down. Every major news outlet is tracking this story intensively because everyone understands what's potentially at stake here. If documents emerge showing that Trump knew about Epstein's trafficking operation, or worse, that he participated in it or witnessed crimes in some way, that would be the biggest political scandal in American history. It would be career-ending and potentially prison-inducing, depending on exactly what the evidence shows and what statutes of limitations might apply. And Trump clearly knows this based on his behavior. His reactions around Epstein-related issues have always suggested someone who's deeply worried about what might come out rather than someone confident in their innocence. So in this video, we're going to break down exactly what the law requires and what happens if the administration doesn't comply. Let's get into it. All right, let's get into the specifics of what's happening because the legal and political dynamics around this Epstein file deadline are genuinely complex and the implications are potentially enormous for Trump, for his administration, for the Republican Party, and for the country's understanding of what really happened in the Epstein case and who among the powerful was involved. The Epstein Files Transparency Act was signed by Trump on November 19, 2025, after passing both chambers of Congress with bipartisan support. The law requires the Attorney General to publicly release documents related to Jeffrey Epstein's activities, his network of associates and enablers, and the various investigations into his trafficking operation that occurred over the years. The release window is 30 days from signing, which puts the hard deadline at December 19, 2025. The law includes some carefully crafted provisions for protecting the privacy of victims. Their identities and personal information can be redacted to prevent further harm or embarrassment to people who were exploited and traumatized. But crucially and specifically, the law explicitly prohibits redactions made for political purposes or to protect the reputations of powerful individuals who were connected to Epstein but weren't themselves victims of his predatory behavior. That prohibition against political and reputational redactions is the absolute key to understanding why this deadline is so extraordinarily dangerous for Trump personally. If the files contain damaging information about his relationship with Epstein, evidence of visits to properties where crimes occurred, communication suggesting knowledge of trafficking, testimony from victims or witnesses, identifying him as someone present at events where illegal activity happened, the administration cannot simply hide that information by claiming privacy concerns or executive privilege or national security or any of the other excuses typically used to conceal embarrassing government documents. The law anticipates exactly that kind of manipulation by powerful people trying to protect themselves and their allies, and it specifically prohibits it in clear and unambiguous language. So the administration faces a genuine dilemma with no comfortable options. Either they comply with the law as written and potentially release devastating information about the president's relationship with a notorious sex trafficker, or they violate the law that Trump himself signed and face the political firestorm and potential legal consequences of that defiance. There's really no middle path that lets them avoid both the substance and the appearance of wrongdoing. The bipartisan group of lawmakers demanding a December 5th briefing represents a serious political constraint on the administration's options that they cannot simply ignore or dismiss. This isn't just Democrats trying to score political points against an opponent they despise. Senator Lisa Murkowski is a Republican from Alaska who has shown independence from Trump on some issues, but is still fundamentally a member of his party who has to answer to Republican voters. Representative Thomas Massie is a libertarian-leaning Republican from Kentucky who's been a consistent and principled voice for government transparency and civil liberties, regardless of which party benefits. Having credible Republicans on board with this demand makes it enormously more difficult for the administration to wave it off as partisan overreach or a Democratic witch hunt. It signals that there are serious people within Trump's own coalition who genuinely want answers and who will push back publicly if the administration tries to obstruct or delay or manipulate the disclosure process. The lawmaker's letter specifically and explicitly mentions wanting to discuss connections with Trump and other notable figures that may be revealed in the files. They're not being subtle or diplomatic about what concerns them and what they're looking for. They want to know what the documents say about the president's relationship with Epstein before those documents become public and generate their own narrative. That could be interpreted charitably as responsible oversight, making sure they understand what's coming so they can respond appropriately and prepare their constituents. Or it could be interpreted as laying the groundwork for accountability and potential action if the revelations are as bad as some observers fear they might be. The House Oversight Committee's ongoing releases of Epstein-related materials add intense pressure from yet another direction that the administration has to manage simultaneously. Just in the past few days, the committee has released previously unseen photographs and videos from Epstein's private island showing the facilities where crimes allegedly took place over many years. The eerie footage of buildings and pools and helicopter pads, the disturbing images of dental chairs and masks, and other equipment whose purposes raise deeply troubling questions. They've also released extensive financial documents from JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank showing how Epstein's operations were funded by major financial institutions that continued doing business with him even after he became a convicted sex offender. They're systematically and deliberately building a comprehensive public record of everything Epstein related that they can obtain, creating context and expectations for transparency that the administration will have to meet or face accusations of hiding even more damaging material than what's already been revealed. The doubts about administration compliance that NBC News and other outlets are reporting on extensively reflect a pattern that's been established over many months of resistance and delay. The Trump administration has simply not been enthusiastic about Epstein-related transparency, despite Trump's occasional public statements suggesting otherwise. There have been significant delays in responding to congressional requests for documents. There have been legal maneuvers and procedural objections that appear designed to slow walk disclosure and run out the clock. There have been credible reports of internal resistance within the Justice Department to releasing certain particularly sensitive materials. The signing of the transparency law itself genuinely surprised some observers who expected Trump to find a way to veto it or let it die without his signature. The question now is whether he signed it believing he could effectively control the implementation through loyalists like Bondi, and whether that assumption is about to be tested in ways he didn't anticipate and can't manage. Attorney General Pam Bondi is at the absolute center of this situation in ways that create obvious and serious potential conflicts of interest that she'll have difficulty navigating. Bondi has a long history of personal loyalty to Trump and has been credibly accused in the past of taking official actions that benefited him personally over the interests of impartial justice. She's the one who will ultimately decide what gets released to the public and what gets held back under various claimed exemptions. She's the one who will interpret the law's provisions about victim privacy and political redactions in ways that determine what Americans actually get to see. And she's the one who will face the consequences both from lawmakers demanding full compliance and potentially from Trump himself if she releases information that damages him politically or legally. The administration has various theoretical options for how to handle the approaching deadline, but none of them are particularly good from Trump's perspective. If the files contain what critics suspect they might, they could comply fully and completely with the law's requirements, releasing everything that's covered and accepting whatever political damage flows from the actual contents. A strategy that only makes sense if the files are relatively benign or if they've concluded the cover-up would be worse than the crime. It could release documents with heavy redactions and claim the redactions are all justified under the victim privacy provisions, risking immediate legal challenge and widespread accusations of an obvious cover-up designed to protect the president. They could attempt to delay past the deadline through some procedural or legal mechanism, claiming they need more time to review materials or that certain documents are subject to ongoing investigations, buying time, but intensifying suspicion about what they're hiding. or they could simply defy the law outright and refuse to release documents, which would be an unprecedented act of executive lawlessness that would almost certainly trigger a full-blown constitutional crisis with unpredictable consequences. The CNN reporting on 2011 emails describing Trump's relationship with Epstein provides crucial context for understanding why Trump should be so worried about what these files might contain. The emails reportedly include communications suggesting that people in Trump's inner orbit were aware of serious allegations against Epstein, while the social and business relationship between the two men continued without apparent concern. If the full documentary record shows a sustained pattern of awareness about Epstein's criminal conduct combined with continued association and friendship, that's deeply damaging to Trump even if it doesn't prove direct participation in specific crimes. It shows that Trump knew or should have known what Epstein was doing with underage girls and chose to maintain the friendship anyway because he valued the social connection or because he was participating in ways that haven't been publicly documented. For someone who spent years trying to distance himself from Epstein and claim he cut ties early after some unspecified falling out, that carefully constructed narrative would collapse completely and irreparably. The timing of all this couldn't possibly be worse for Trump from a political standpoint, given everything else he's dealing with simultaneously. His approval rating is already at historic lows, around 36%. He's managing multiple simultaneous scandals, including the Venezuela boat strike controversy, with accusations of war crimes, the ongoing health concerns and questions about his fitness for office, the Mike Johnson meltdown in the House, and the dysfunction of the Republican majority, and now this looming Epstein deadline. Each new crisis compounds the others by dividing the administration's attention and resources while creating an overall public impression of chaos and incompetence and potential criminality at the highest levels. The Epstein deadline is potentially the most dangerous of all these crises because it touches on the most viscerally disturbing allegations imaginable that the President of the United States was friends with and possibly somehow complicit in the crimes of a notorious child sex trafficker, preyed on vulnerable girls for decades. Okay, so let's break this down into the key points that everyone needs to understand, because this deadline and everything surrounding it could genuinely be a defining moment for Trump's presidency and for fundamental questions of accountability that extend far beyond partisan politics or any individual politician. Point number one, the Epstein Files Transparency Act that Trump signed creates a concrete legal obligation that's extremely difficult to avoid without appearing to cover up something genuinely damaging. The law has specific and explicit provisions prohibiting political redactions designed to protect powerful people. It mandates release within a clear 30-day window. It was signed by Trump himself with his own hand, meaning he cannot credibly claim it's an illegitimate law imposed on him by enemies or that he wasn't aware of what he was agreeing to. He either has to comply and accept whatever consequences flow from the contents of the files, or he has to defy his own law and face accusations of obstruction and cover up that would dominate news coverage for weeks or months. There's simply no comfortable middle ground where he releases some carefully selected things and hides others without facing intense and sustained scrutiny of every single redaction and every notable omission. Point number two, the bipartisan nature of the congressional pressure campaign makes it significantly harder for the administration to dismiss demands for compliance as mere partisan overreach or a Democratic witch hunt. When you have Murkowski and Massey, credible Republicans with real standing in their party, joining Democrats in demanding full briefings and complete disclosure, you cannot credibly claim this is just another left-wing attack designed to take down a Republican president. Republicans are on record wanting real answers too. That political cover matters enormously because it gives other Republicans permission to join the chorus. If the administration appears to be stonewalling or manipulating the process, it signals that transparency on this particular issue has genuine cross-party support that cannot be easily dismissed, overridden, or spun away. Point number three, the established pattern of delay and resistance that's already been documented creates strong expectations and deep suspicions that work against the administration, even if they ultimately do comply with the deadline. When you've spent months visibly slow-walking disclosure and fighting document requests and looking for procedural ways to avoid genuine transparency, people simply don't give you the benefit of the doubt when the deadline finally arrives and you claim to be acting in good faith. Every redaction will be intensely scrutinized by journalists and investigators. Every omission will be questioned and challenged. Every claim that certain materials fall outside the law's requirements will be met with skepticism and demands for proof. The administration has created a serious credibility deficit through its own behavior that means even genuine and complete compliance will be viewed skeptically by critics, by journalists, and by the general public looking for the story behind the official story. Point number four, what we already know about Trump's documented relationship with Epstein provides abundant reason to believe the files could be genuinely damaging rather than exonerating when they finally emerge. The numerous photographs of them together at multiple social events and gatherings over many years show an obvious comfort and familiarity. The direct quote from Trump about Epstein liking young women on the younger side, The documented social connection that extended for at least a decade of regular contact. The 2011 emails suggesting awareness of allegations within Trump's inner circle while the relationship continued. The flight logs and witness testimony that have placed Trump at various Epstein properties over the years. All of this creates a context where additional documentary evidence could complete a picture that's already deeply troubling for anyone paying attention. If the files show nothing new or damaging, Trump gets some political relief and can claim vindication. But if they fill in gaps in what we know, if they show communications, visits, or interactions that confirm the worst suspicions about what Trump knew and when he knew it, the political and potentially legal consequences are severe. Point number 5. The December 19th deadline creates a focal point for political coverage that will dominate the news cycle, regardless of what specific outcome occurs. In the days leading up to the deadline, every major outlet will be running stories and analysis about what might be revealed and what the implications could be. On the deadline itself, there will be intensive wall-to-wall coverage of what's actually released and what it shows about Trump and other powerful figures. In the days and weeks after, there will be detailed analysis and follow-up investigation and reporting on the specific details that emerge. This story simply isn't going to quietly fade away or get lost in the noise of other events. It's going to be front and center in the political conversation through the holiday period and well into the new year as the revelations are digested and their implications become clear. The question everyone is asking privately and increasingly publicly is whether Trump is truly scared of what might come out, and the available evidence strongly suggests he absolutely should be terrified. His behavior around Epstein-related issues has consistently been that of someone desperately trying to manage a dangerous situation rather than someone genuinely confident in their own innocence. He's alternated between claiming minimal acquaintance with Epstein and acknowledging their friendship depending on what seemed advantageous at the moment. He's attacked political opponents for their Epstein connections while avoiding honest discussion of his own. The signing of the transparency law itself could have been an attempt to get ahead of the issue and appear committed to truth while actually planning to control the implementation through loyal appointees. If that was a strategy, it's backfiring spectacularly, as bipartisan pressure and sustained media scrutiny make manipulation far more difficult than anticipated. For Attorney General Pam Bondi, this situation represents a genuine test of whether she's truly committed to the rule of law and impartial justice, or whether she's ultimately a Trump loyalist who will protect him at the expense of her legal and ethical obligations. Her decisions in the coming days and weeks will define her professional legacy and potentially affect her own legal exposure if she participates in documented efforts to obstruct legitimate disclosure requirements mandated by federal law. She's caught in an impossible position if Trump is privately pressuring her to withhold damaging materials while the law clearly and unambiguously requires their release. The broader implications for American democracy and the rule of law are genuinely significant regardless of the specific contents of the files. We're about to see whether transparency laws actually mean anything when they threaten powerful people who want to hide uncomfortable truths. We're about to see whether Congress can effectively oversee an executive branch that may actively want to conceal information. We're about to see whether the rule of law applies equally to presidents, or whether sufficient power creates sufficient immunity from accountability. These questions go beyond the specific Epstein facts to fundamental issues about how our system of government functions and whether anyone is truly above the law. Looking ahead to the possible scenarios, several outcomes are plausible. The administration could release documents that are genuinely damaging, but ultimately survivable politically, evidence of poor judgment and troubling associations, but not criminal participation, and Trump could attempt to weather the storm through his usual combination of denial, distraction, and counterattack. The administration could release documents that are genuinely devastating, clear evidence of knowledge about trafficking or participation in criminal activity, which would trigger immediate calls for impeachment, criminal investigation, and potentially the most serious constitutional crisis since Watergate or worse. Or the administration could resist meaningful compliance in ways that trigger their own constitutional crisis, making the cover-up potentially as damaging politically as whatever underlying conduct they're trying to hide from the American people. None of these scenarios is comfortable for Trump or his allies. Even the best case, releasing relatively mild material that shows poor judgment but not criminality, still keeps the Epstein connection in headlines for weeks and reminds voters of the disturbing associations that Trump has tried so hard to minimize. The worst cases are potentially career-ending, administration-ending, or even freedom-ending, depending on what exactly the evidence shows, and the uncertainty itself is politically damaging, keeping Trump visibly on edge and creating a pervasive sense that the other shoe could drop at any moment with catastrophic consequences. Anyway, that's where things stand as we approach this absolutely crucial deadline that could reshape American politics. The Epstein Files Transparency Act that Trump signed, creating legal obligations he may not be able to escape. The bipartisan pressure campaign demanding full compliance and immediate briefings. The documented pattern of resistance that's created deep suspicion about what's being hidden. The prior evidence of Trump's extensive Epstein connection that provides disturbing context. And the relentless countdown to December 19th that's creating visible anxiety throughout the administration and the Republican Party. Make sure you're subscribed because this story is going to explode over the next 2 weeks as we approach the deadline and see what the administration actually does when the moment of truth arrives. Whether they comply fully as the law requires, release partial information with suspicious redactions, or try to obstruct entirely, each scenario creates its own political firestorm with unpredictable consequences. And if the documents contain what some observers fear they might contain about Trump's actual relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and his knowledge of the crimes being committed, this could be the story that defines not just this administration, but this entire era of American politics and finally brings accountability to the powerful. I'll see you in the next one.